Today's video is about La Bohème, Opera for Black Folks edition. Long story short, let's go. Hi, Cassandra here with Opera for Black Folks, and on this channel I break down the classical arts and opera from a Jamaican American perspective. All right, first, a little bit of historical context. I really love how art reflects life and life reflects art, or life is reflected in art, and so I just want to give some context for the story of La Bohème.
Picture this.
So first, it's a Parisian story. The story was inspired by Henri Murger, and he wrote a collection of stories that reflected his life as a Parisian writer, poet in 18th century France, or Paris, France. What was happening in Paris, France at that time? There's lots of recovery from the French Revolution, which happened in the 17th century. So by the time this 18th century came around, there was a lot of shifts in the economy because socially, economically, and financially, there was a disproportionate gap between the wealthy and the poor. And so at this time, the bourgeoisie, as we call them today, or the bourgeoisie or the middle class was beginning to burgeon, and that meant that there was a change in people honoring the aristocracy, which was a dictatorship, and move it to a democracy. And so that shift created a lot of revolution, hence the French Revolution. And we are framing this story at that time in France in the 18th century. Okay, so a little bit about Henri Murger. He was born in 1822. His novel did bring him fame in his lifetime. Every work thereafter, he was never able to reach that height again. He wrote stories about his life living in a garret, which is a small apartment that is at the top of a building. It's usually not heated or insulated. It's rented very cheaply, and it was a places where artists, writers, creatives sought to live because it was all they could afford. Despite the fame in his lifetime, he died almost penniless in a hospital on January 28th, 1861 at only 38 years old. That's exactly why parents are always like, no, don't be an artist, because we have this image of a pitiful existence as a creative. So I have to acknowledge that I was so focused on talking about Henri Murger that I completely missed talking about Puccini. Puccini's the composer that wrote La Bohème, and if it wasn't for Puccini, we would not be appreciating the story the way that we do. Yes, Henri got acclaim during his lifetime for writing this amazing story and doing something that hadn't been done before, but it was really a young Puccini who's found the story and was able to take snips and bits of it and rewrite it in a way that could be appreciated for music. And that made such a difference because he tightened up the story, he merged characters together, and if it really wasn't for Puccini and his brilliance, we wouldn't be appreciating these melodies and these stories the way that we do. So I just want to take a moment to shout out to Puccini, especially because today, December 23rd, when I'm filming this, is his birthday, so I would be remiss to not acknowledge the great Giacomo Puccini, who wrote La Bohème, and the music is so powerful and impactful that we continue to enjoy it and appreciate it every year here in America, and I'm sure all over the world at various opera houses. So sorry, Puccini, but I just want to throw this in there to make sure that he gets his representation too. Okay. Act 1. So the opera starts where we are in that Parisian garret, and we have Rodolfo, who is our AKA Henri Murger, poet, writer, his roommate Marcello, who is a painter, and they are trying to focus on their creative work, but they are cold and they are hungry, and they can't deny that they are cold and they're hungry, and so they're just trying to ignore the fact that this is their reality. And then all of a sudden their friends Colline and Schaunard show up. Now Colline is the philosopher. He has this wonderful desire to keep all of his books near him, and he's always, looking at the world through this philosophical lens. He's a very wonderful character. And then we also have Schaunard, who is the musician, and who I love. When he enters, he's basically been like, hey guys, it's Christmas Eve. I've brought wood, I've brought wine, I've brought food, and they start to celebrate and have a good old time. As they're celebrating, there's a knock on the door, and it is their landlord asking asking for money, of which the four gentlemen use their cunning and their charm. They manage to weasel out of it and actually kick the landlord out. And so to celebrate their win, they decide to go out on Christmas Eve and enjoy the Christmas Eve festivities, as well as go and have a celebratory dinner at Café Momus. And they start to go, but Rodolfo goes, I do want to get this one thought down. He was like trying to find his muse. He's been struggling to find his inspiration. And as he sits down, pen to paper, he hears a knock at the door. It's a woman. So this is where we meet Mimi, who is a seamstress. She's an embroiderer. She embroiders flowers. It's all wonderful. She knocked on his door because she wants him to light her candle. Wink. I think she knows that Rodolfo lives there. I think she's been eyeing this whole time, and she's like, let me figure out a way to come get this, go to this guy and get him to pay some attention to me. And then all of a sudden, she faints because she don't know it, but she's not well. And so, walking up and down stairs depletes her, and she actually faints, and he's like, oh my gosh. Rodolfo, being a gentleman, he brings her to with a little water in her face and a little wine, and you can really hear it in the music. It's lovely. Rodolfo is so taken by how beautiful she is, but she is feeling embarrassed, and she's like, oh my gosh, I have got to go. And he's like, yeah, sure, okay. And she goes to the door to leave and realizes, oh, sventata la chiave della stanza. She's forgotten her key. Oh my goodness. And so they're looking, and then because they're looking and there's not a lot of insulation in this garret, the candles that are lit do go out. And so they're searching in the dark, and Rodolfo finds that key first, that little sly dog, and he decides to keep it and hide it. And they keep searching around, and he finds a way to be near her enough so that their hands touch. And then he takes his moment and he sings this gorgeous aria called Che gelida manina. Basically, your cold, tiny hand. And he takes his moment and he sings this glorious aria telling him about who he is and what he stands for and how he lives his life. And then he says, tell me about you. And she sings her aria, Si mi chiamano Mimi, or I am called Mimi, but my name is Lucia, I don't know why, but this is what it is. And she shares about her life, and there's mutual attraction. And then all of a sudden you hear Marcello being like, hey, hola, non senti? And he's basically like, hey, dude, what's up? Hey, you coming? And Rodolfo's like, oh, siamo in due. We are now, I'm not one, but now I'm two. Go to Café Momus. I found my muse. I will be there soon. To which Rodolfo and Mimi have this moment of expressing how much they are now falling in love with each other. There's mutual like, and they sing this glorious duet together called O Suave Fanciulla. And it's the most wonderful depiction of what love sounds like. If love has to have a sound, this is what it sounds like. It's the end of Act 1 for La Bohème, so I hope you go and really listen to it. It's great. You should definitely go see it. It's a great Christmas show. Anyway, let's go on to Act 2. Okay. Act 2, we are now in the Latin Quarter, and we're looking for Café Momus, but it's Christmas Eve. It's it's great, it's wonderful. There's all this chorus on stage. It's really vibrant, it's colorful, there's toys, there's vendors, people shopping. It's like walking to Union Square in Manhattan and being like, oh, at least during Christmas time, and it's like, oh, it's so festive, it's wonderful, the little wares that you can buy, and street food and da da da. In this moment, we see Rodolfo and Mimi having their first date. It's so cute, I love it. And so while they're on this date, he buys her a sweet little like pink coral bonnet, of which she's like, oh, it matches my hair, I love it. And also the other friends, we know Shonard and Colline and Marcello, like they're also out and about and they're buying things, so we see that as well. We get to Café Momus, And Rodolfo introduces Mimi to Colline, Chonard, and Marcello. And to each, they have their wonderful little greeting, and they accept Mimi into their group. Well, Marcello is in his feelings because he is still recovering from the fact that he was totally in love with Musetta, who we're about to meet, and how she broke his heart. With one line from Scenes of Bohemian Life, I love it. Marcello was gunpowder, and one glance from Musetta was the match to spark the flame. I love that. I love that. Like, that's how electric their attraction was. No matter what, he was hopeless to resist her. He couldn't help himself. He's in his feelings, and Mimi feels like, oh my gosh, I must have offended him. And Rodolfo's like, no. Or he's in his feelings because he just got left by Musetta, and she's like, oh, who's Musetta? And Marcello is like, I'll tell you. He goes on about how terrible she is. It's wonderful. And as they have this moment, we meet Musetta, who comes in. She's just a local singer who sometimes makes her money that way. But the way she really sustains herself is to find men who have lots of money to support her. And she just keeps them around until she's ready to move on, because Musetta loves beautiful things and she needs a man that can provide. That's probably why she left Marcello in the first place. But that's another story. Anyway, she comes in and she notices that Marcello is not paying any attention to her, and she really wants to get rid of her old lover so that she could really see if she can get her new lover back. And so she stops and sings Quando Men Vo, gets the attention of everybody in the restaurant, and somehow manages to devise a plan to get rid of Alcindoro, her old man lover, and manages to incite attraction in Marcello, and she wins him back. So she takes her friend's bill and she takes the bill that they had. She has the waiter put them both together, and then they manage to run away and get lost in the Christmas Eve parade and all the festivities. They're able to slip away in the crowd, and poor Alcindoro is left a really long bill and having spent all his money, and his lady left him, and that's how Act 2 ends. So by Act 3, we are now in February. So Act 2 was Christmas Eve. Now we're in February. It's still cold. It's actually probably colder. And we are at the Barrier d'Enfer, is basically a bed and breakfast with a diner on the road before you take off to this next journey, right? And so Marcello and Musetta have found their way. They're in a relationship together, and Musetta sings at this little tavern, and Marcello is painting a mural on the local tavern, and Musetta entertains the guests that come. Sometimes she gives singing lessons, but the scene doesn't start quite there. The scene starts with Mimi. She looks frail and cold, and she's barely wearing anything, and she almost looks gauntly. Mimi finds Marcello, and she begs for his help, and she says, look, this is what's going on between Rodolfo and I don't know, like, he left this morning. I just can't seem to make him happy. What's going on? And Marcello is like, why don't you come inside? And she's like, no, I just can't. And he realizes how much she's coughing and how sick she looks. And, Rodolfo was here earlier. He's on his way back. So I'll talk to him and maybe you guys can talk. And she's like, no. She loses her nerve. And he says, okay. I'll talk to him on your behalf. Why don't you just chill out over here and hide, and don't let Rodolfo know that you're here. And she's like, okay, cool. She goes off. And then Rodolfo comes bounding in. Marcello finalmente, e separarmi da Mimi. Basically, he's like, hey, I finally have left Mimi. I'm so done with her. She's, a flirt, and I can't trust her, and she's just trifling, and all these things. And Marcello is like, really, dog? She's what? You think she's out in these streets? Really? That's what you think? Oh, okay. And so he's like, yeah, that's exactly what's going on. And he's like, what about you? You're this, you're noioso, cochuco. He calls him lunatico, colerico. Basically, he's coming for him, be like, dude, you're the one that's the crazy one. You're the one who's the lunatic. You're the one who acts all jealous all the time. Why are you trying to come for Mimi like that? And he's like, nah. Mimi is in the background hearing this, going, oh my gosh. Ooh. Then Marcello really lets Rodolfo have it. He's like, what is going on? And Rodolfo breaks down. He's like, Mimi, c'era, di da da. Basically, Mimi is sick and I don't know what to do. And because I don't know what to do, I just left her. I just picked a fight and I just left. Mimi is dying. She doesn't know it, but she is dying. And the coughs, it just racks her and I can't help her and I don't know what to do. To which Mimi is taking this all in and realizes, oh my God, I'm dying. And she just starts to get really emotional and she starts crying, and then the crying leads to coughing, and then Rodolfo hears her, and then he's just like, oh my gosh. And in the middle of this, while Rodolfo is tending to Mimi, Marcello overhears Musetta in the tavern giggling and laughing, and he gets instantly jealous, and he's like, oh my gosh, what is that girl doing? And so he runs off into the tavern to go try to catch her in the act. And so there's this beautiful moment where Mimi collects herself and she says, goodbye forever. Here, let me just arrange these things for you to collect my things, but I get it, like, we're gonna break up. And it's a gorgeous, sad aria. Donde lieta, basically, she wishes she could go back to when things were nice and beautiful, like bring me back those beautiful memories. I want to go back there, but I'm here right now, and right now here is where I have to let go of this man I love and this life that I love. And it's okay, I let you go without any bitterness, any rancor, I'm not holding anything against you. And to which then we have this gorgeous moment, and Rodolfo just starts to be like, no, but like, can't we stay together? We should be with each other until the spring. They start to reminisce and they are coming closer together. But during this moment, we see Marcello and Musetta come splashing out onto the stage, and they're angry and they break up because Marcello is accusing Musetta of flirting, and Musetta is like, I should be free to do whatever the heck I want to do. You can't tell me what to do. I am my own woman. And Marcello is like, oh, you are? Well, let me get up in your face and tell you what's what. And that didn't go over well, so they part. Rodolfo and Mimi will also part, but their parting is going to happen Stagione dei Fiori, in the season of the flowers. What starts off as a duet turns into a quartet, turns into a separation of two lovers in two very different ways. And that brings us to Act 4. Back in Marcello and Rodolfo's garret apartment, Rodolfo is trying to write, Marcello is trying to paint, but all he can do is paint pictures of Musetta, and Rodolfo is stuck only thinking of Mimi. It's not very often, I just want to acknowledge it is very rare in the opera world to see a tenor and a baritone come together and sing together in a duet that isn't at odds with each other. It's very rare. Usually the tenor and the baritone are like screaming angrily at each other about to duel, they're about to fight, they're fighting over a woman. But in this one, they are both sad and like, oh. And so it's a beautiful duet called Omini tu più non torni da 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 dam bam ba dam. It's wonderful. Anyway, then Colline and Chonard, Colline our philosopher, Chonard our musician, show up. And so they come over and they do a mock banquet, like, oh, we're so rich, we'll have this wonderful banquet. And then two of the guys pretend to be women and they do these dances, gavottes and such. Then they start to do a sword play. They're fighting, they're pretending to sword fight, just horsing around and messing with each other and having a good old time so that they forget about the fact that they're hungry and they're cold. And then all of a sudden their apartment door whacks open and there is Musetta saying, oh my gosh guys, Mimi's downstairs, she is not well, she needs help, we need to clear space, this has to happen right now. And Rodolfo is like overcome. He's like, what? Oh, little background about Musetta and Mimi. They did find other partners. Musetta found another guy, she always does, and then Mimi found a viscount, or like a lord, to take care of her, but she left him. And so Musetta shares this with her friend. I heard that Mimi had left the Viscount and that she was looking for Rodolfo because she felt like she needed to be with him. I found her on the streets, literally, she was dragging herself down the street. Musetta brings her to Rodolfo and to Marcello, and mind you, Marcello and Musetta haven't seen each other since they broke up in February. So there's like feelies there, except for Mimi, who is being, loved on by Rodolfo. Everyone else is looking to see what they can do to sell their wares or their possessions in order to get a doctor and medicine in order to help Mimi in this moment. Colline has a gorgeous aria in the middle of this where he is acknowledging his release of his possessions and his worldly things that he loves in this world to give to to Mimi, and he could steal the show. Even though it's a fantastic show, he could steal the show in this moment. So they go to help Mimi. They all leave, and Mimi and Rodolfo have this lovely moment where they get to have this duet, which is a callback to the music from the first act of their arias where they fell in love with each other. So we hear those melodies come back again, this lovely interweaving. It's so sweet. And so when everybody returns, Shonard and Marcello are trying to get the medicine together. Musetta brings a muff to help keep Mimi's hands warm, and she says to Mimi that it was Rodolfo that bought it, and this is a wonderful word. She's like, oh, spensierato, oh, you spendthrift, grazie. Then Musetta makes a prayer. She prays to the Madonna to help Mimi to survive this moment. And then Marcello announces that the doctor will be there soon. And so there's this sort of waiting for things to happen, waiting for the medicine to come together. And then when the medicine's ready, there's a collective hush from each character. First, Marcello realizes that Mimi is gone. And then he looks at Musetta, who understands. Colline is acknowledged in what has happened. And then Rodolfo, who's holding on to the last of hope, looks at his friends and asks, why are you looking at me that way? What is it? And Marcello tells him to have courage. And then Rodolfo understands, and he loses all hope, and he throws his weeping body onto Mimi as he cries out her name, Mimi! Ah. And everybody cries. That's the end.